Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 1st of October now, and as always, you can find today's forecast and more anytime you want at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. During the day, you can find information that rounds out your weather gathering experience there on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you can go to NWS Anchorage and NWS Fairbanks to get your daily afternoon map briefing from the Alaska Weather TV Desk team. On Facebook, you can find out information, anything from about your general forecast or perhaps just some interesting pictures from the Aurora Borealis or maybe the sea ice outlook or perhaps the walrus haulout going on the Chukchi Seacoast. Some amazing pictures shared there today on Twitter. A great way to communicate with us, whether it's a weather question or a picture sharing or a weather report you'd like to use. When you get on Twitter, make sure you use hashtag AKwx. That's short for Alaska Weather, and that's a great way to alert the National Weather Service teams around Alaska that you're wanting to share something with us, or you just like to be grouped in with that Alaska weather conversation. Here's what we see as far as Alaska weather headlines go. Currently, storm warnings offshore in the Gulf of Alaska. A potent storm system there is slowly working its way northward. It's going to add a little more wind to southeastern Alaska and eventually to Kodiak and probably the Aleutians going forward. In the meantime, gales are posted from Nikolsky to Ketchikan. You can see that when you go to weather.gov/Alaska on the map there. It's going to be turning colder again north of the Alaska Range as we head toward the end of the week. A series of disturbances dropping southward will open the door toward colder weather, and that opens the door for some snow moving towards southern Alaska, especially out toward Glen Allen and points eastward there. So we'll be keeping track of that as we head forward in time toward Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. In the meantime, looking out to the west, you can see a decent storm system well to the south, right on the eastern edge of our satellite picture here. We've got another wave of low pressure across the Kamchatka Peninsula, and all around the North Pacific there, things are a little bit quieter than they've been. One thing that you can just barely get the sense of is a typhoon there across the the Western Pacific off of Eastern Asia. That is tracking north and west. It is a typhoon. Phanphone, I believe is how you say that. And we're not sure exactly where it's going to go in the next week or so, but for the next couple days, it's probably making more of a north and westerly turn, and we'll see how that affects our own Alaska weather in time, but way too soon to talk about that. Just something interesting to note on the satellite picture today. Now, as we look at the rest of Alaska, you'll notice southeastern Alaska has cleared up substantially after a pretty wet day for some in the central and southern parts of southeast. The front sweeping through there has settled some of the winds down and swept away some of the clouds. A little bit cooler, though, as a result of that front passing through. And now on its heels, you can see the low pressure system across the Gulf is moving northward. As it does so, it's running into a wealth of dry air. So initially, it will be more clouds and a little bit more bark than bite at this point. Clouds starting to creep into Kodiak and the Alaska Peninsula, wrapping into another section of low pressure there south of the Aleutians. Across the north, clouds have been building in, and another wave of low pressure heading for the Chukchi Seacoast. You can see those brighter clouds here moving in. That's another frontal boundary, and it will stir up more snow showers and probably at least a little bit of accumulating snow for some parts of the interior in the next couple days. But over southern Alaska and southwest, considerable amounts of dry air noted and a pretty sunny and bright day for many, though maybe a little bit of a touch on the cool side, especially in the morning. Many more places noticing a little bit more of the thicker frost in the morning hours there. So here we go with our weather chart. High pressure sitting across extreme west and southwest Yukon at 1,031 millibars. A frontal boundary dropping into the Dixon entrance there, kind of clearing up the chance for rainfall, at least for the next 24 hours or so for most cases there. In the meantime, you can see more snow across some of the Canadian Rockies for sure, with a visible satellite image picking some of that up. And across the north, also seeing a little more snow on some of the higher terrain, including the Alaska Range here, especially around the passes. Another front moving into the Chukchi Seacoast, dropping a little bit of light rain around Kivalina and Kotzebue and Nome all the way out toward Tin City. And the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, looking at some light rain earlier this afternoon. So conditions were warm enough, at least for the sensors' take on the weather, to record at least some light rainfall there. Behind that, out across the Chukchi Sea, even further north, is another frontal boundary. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch for a little more colder weather moving into the interior as we head toward Friday and into Saturday. Out to the west, another front is occluded. That's producing some light rain and drizzle along that boundary. And as it moves northward, it's really not going to move a whole lot further eastward, running into high pressure and a ridge that's just more or less acting like a brick wall, not allowing that to just swing eastward at this time. So we're going to really focus on what's going on here across the Gulf and what's going on up across the North Slope at this point. By tonight, snow showers will remain possible. Now, at least across the north, you can see a huge area that's shaded in blue. Well, chances are not every single one of those spots is going to get some snow, or certainly not even accumulating snow, but the opportunity for some of those showers to pop up in that area is certainly possible. It's a large area, and there will be some scattered snow showers both in front and behind that front. And northwesterly winds will start to pick up a little bit more north and east of Barrow out toward Kaktovik as low pressure is moving eastward at 1,013 millibars. High pressure sitting over the central Yukon at 1,029 millibars is still keeping dry air across southeast, but you'll notice that low pressure is working northward. That's the reason for the storm warnings out across the Gulf of Alaska at this point. So as high pressure is still intact and low pressure is moving in on that territory, the difference has to be made up in the amount of wind moving around these storms. And that's going to increase the winds here across the northern Gulf, and it's going to pick the winds up across especially the Pacific coastline of the Alaska Peninsula and into the central and eastern chain. Our high pressure ridge is still in place there. You can see that pushing its way southward, and the lines drop southward here. That's the ridge, and it's holding back that next storm. Across the north, frontal boundaries dropped a little bit further south toward the Brooks Range, and if we do get some precipitation along the Yukon Valley, it's still going to be mild enough that there could be more of a rain and snow mix type of situation rather than purely all snow. So we're still on a transitional phase of our seasons at this point. By Thursday, the front isn't moving much further southward at this point, and we still have some mild air across the Yukon Valley from the lower and middle valley, even into the upper valley. There's an opportunity for more rain showers to be had than any rain-snow mix or even all snow at this point. However, our storm in the south is moving northward now, and it's at 974 millibars out in the middle of the Gulf. The triple point part of this system is getting closer and closer to Yakutat and still offshore of Sitka and well south and west of Gustavus, but that's where we normally see some of the heavier precipitation. This is going to reorganize again and probably become the dominant part of the storm. As the strong southwesterly flow moves northward, it's pushing warm and wet air back into southeastern Alaska. Expect more wind and more rain. There are going to be some stronger winds there as we head through Thursday, so watch for that in your marine forecast here in a moment. Out in the Bering Sea, plenty of fog to be had. Winds are picking up for the Pribilovs, St. Matthew, and Nunivak Island. And the central and eastern Aleutians, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, shall see some stronger, more sustained winds, as well as areas in the western Aleutians, though probably not as much. Going forward toward Friday, now this looks like a little bit more of a meteor storm closer to the coastline, and right offshore of Yakutat at 984 millibars, we notice the storm, first of all, has filled in a little bit, so at least by the numbers, it's not as strong as it was when it was out over open water. However, it has now latched on to some colder air up across the North Slope and the interior, and this combined with moisture that's in place could create a better chance for snow across the interior, including the middle Tanana Valley. Out over the Copper River Basin, there's an opportunity for some light accumulation there. We'll be tracking that. And across southeast, well, you're still in more of a rain situation here. The winds will stay up. You have an opportunity for some heavier rainfall from Yakutat to Sitka and northward toward the Haines and Skagway regions, as well as Juneau. Across the west, the winds will stay up, but it looks like you're going to be getting some drier air wrapping around the western side of this. So the clouds may even break up for a time across the lower and middle Yukon Valley. Watch for an opportunity for some snow and rain showers to form, generally from McGrath and northward. And out across the western coast, the Seward Peninsula may still be just warm enough for some rain and fog with areas of drizzle and rain across the central and eastern Aleutians and the Bering Sea coast along the Alaska Peninsula. By Saturday, the storm is going to move a little bit more to the north and east, and we'll see what happens after that as more cold air moves southward. Here's a look at temperatures then today, and across many areas we saw a little bit of a cooler day, including southeast, upper 40s and lower 50s for many there. Juneau 50 degrees, 52 in Sitka, Ketchikan, and Annette. 54 in Cordova, lower 50s for Valdez, and a milder day, but a dry day for Homer and Seward with 48 in Kenai, 46 in Anchorage, and 48 was a temperature in Talkeetna at 4 o'clock. 37 was all we could muster up there in Fairbanks, 42 in Eagle, and a 1 degree warmer in Northway with Fort Yukon at 43. AKwx Pass was a much colder 28 with snow surrounding the hills there. Mid-30s across the Arctic coast, 40 in Wainwright, 44 in Kivalina. Shishmaref and Kotzebue both looking at lower 40s today, 47 in Nome. Unalakleet and most of Norton Sound was in the mid-40s. Most of southwestern Alaska really saw a fairly uniform temperature spread by late afternoon. 44 in McGrath, out around Dillingham and many in the Bristol Bay regions. Temperatures were from the upper 40s to lower 50s there around Cape Newingham. The Alaska Peninsula is typically in the low 50s this afternoon, about 50 degrees for the Pribilofs, low 50s for Kodiak Island, Adak, Atka, and Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, all in the lower 50s. Shemya was showing only 49 with St. Lawrence, as you saw, at 46. Now, overnight low temperatures will drop into the mid-40s for the chain. Southwestern Alaska should hold in the mid-30s. Unalaska and most of Norton Sound closer to 40 degrees with Nome at 46. The Arctic coast in the upper 20s and lower 30s. Southeast in the mid-30s there, Juneau about 35. Prince William Sound may see some temperatures getting pretty close to the freezing point there around Cordova. Valdez looking at 20 degrees tonight, so cooling off there. And mid to upper 20s are expected around Anchorage with high temperatures tomorrow, probably looking at upper 40s for many, even with some sunshine. Mid-40s for some parts of Fairbanks, so still warmer ahead of that approaching cold front. Lower 30s for the Arctic coast. Seward and a good chunk of Nome looking at 44 degrees there in the lower to mid-40s for many areas there. The Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta in the upper 40s to lower 50s. Ammonok, though, could be a little bit cooler at 44. 50 around Nunivak Island, 51 for St. Paul, lower 50s for the central and eastern Aleutians, and the Alaska Peninsula typically in the lower 50s for tomorrow. On to flying weather. We expect MVFR conditions for a wide area of southeast by tomorrow afternoon. Some small pockets of IFR may be found around the Chukchi Seacoast and then gradually kind of creeping eastward along the Beaufort Seacoast, but that should remain mostly along the coast. Once you get inland, things should clear up to VFR, and then once you get back into the hills, you might find some patchy MVFR as that frontal boundary is working through. South of Atka, a strip of IFR conditions should develop, but other than that, a large area in the Bering should be pretty clear tomorrow. So if you've got some flying to do out over the water, tomorrow might be your day. AKwx Pass will transition toward MVFR and improve during the day. Same goes for Adigan Pass, but do watch for some snow showers in the morning. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions there for Rainy Pass and Windy Pass, smooth and clear sailing through Isabel Pass. And Mentasta Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule throughout the day. Tanita Pass should hold at VFR through most of your day, but once you get over toward Portage Pass, we're still looking at clear conditions a little bit further north, though, and east. At Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see MVFR, so watch for some transitional things there. And around Mentasta Pass, we also expect a little bit of change in that visibility, generally north of that pass where you enter or exit, depending on your direction, of course. Northward, colder air is dropping southward as we've been talking about, but aloft that, there's still enough warm air just overrunning that, and we could see some clouds develop as a result of that across the west. 2, 4, and 6,000 foot freezing levels there across the YK and across southeast. Look for a pretty tight gradient there. As far as the temperatures go, those range anywhere from about 2,000 feet for Haines and Skagway to about 6,000 feet around Annette and Ketchikan, with even warmer weather out over the east and northern Pacific. Now, as far as icing potential goes, with a front moving in, we've already seen there's snow falling from some of those clouds. Don't be surprised to run into some light to isolated moderate across the eastern Brooks Range, but generally above 4,000 feet. Across the north and eastern Gulf, above 10,000 feet for southeastern Alaska, and across the open waters of the Gulf. There'll be a lot of wind there and turbulence as well. And just south of the chain, along that frontal boundary and trough, above 6,000 feet, you'll find at least some light to isolated moderate icing, generally above 6,000 feet. And some pockets of occasional moderate along that boundary. The jet stream shows a northwesterly track coming out of eastern Asia and heading for western Alaska. Ridge of high pressure across the Pacific Northwest right now is allowing some stronger winds to traverse the North Pacific. But again, we're still kind of talking about two different storm tracks. One of these is responsible for the cold. This track here is responsible for the moisture. When they meet up, that's when we get our a little bit stronger and wetter and snowier storms. Across the west coast, we pretty much have a dominant north flow right now, 20, 30, even 35 knots coming out of the Bering Strait and heading over the Alaska Peninsula. Low pressure across the Gulf, driving winds in from the south and southwest, and those pick up to about 55 knots as you get into the northern Gulf. Winds are generally light across the interior and along the Arctic coast, coming in from the west and northwest at 15 knots. That diminishes to 5 knots at 3,000 feet. Low pressure across the Gulf between 40 and 50 knots. Northeasterlies coming out of the Yukon and Kuskokwim river valleys there in the lower and middle valleys to about 20 knots, and then moving across the southern Bering Sea from east to west around 20 to 30 knots with high pressure around the Gulf of Anadyr. As far as turbulence goes, then, expect the usual suspects here across southeast, across the northern coastal waters of the Gulf, all the way out to Kodiak, at least occasional moderate. There might even be some cases of widespread moderate developing throughout the day. Around the Brooks Range, below 5,000 feet and below 4,000 feet across some of your favorite landing areas in the Aleutians. Look for at least occasional moderate in some places there, with light moderate stretching for most of the chain and Kodiak Island. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with an update on the sea ice edge and, of course, your marine forecast as well. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us today is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. And you're joining us here to talk a little bit more about satellites and how satellites work, and especially one neat feature that's working over Alaska right now. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of weather satellites and a lot of instruments on these satellites, and there are new generations going up and new instruments. This includes something called the Day-Night Band, which is not a cover band at the local bar, but it's a new satellite that is very useful, especially here in Alaska, especially in the winter.
In the wintertime, yeah, that makes it a little bit hard to use some of the normal tools that we associate with weather satellite imagery.
Right. You know, one of the classic weather satellite instruments is just visible light. What would the human eye see if you were riding on a weather satellite yourself and looked down and it was black and white? You'd see the clouds reflecting the sunlight. And we've got an example from the Pacific Ocean. There's a geostationary satellite, and we can see that the eastern side of the image is in daylight. The western side, it's night over there, so you don't see anything because there's no sunlight over there. And visible imagery, it's very intuitive. You see the clouds just like you see them standing on the ground, but now you're a satellite seeing them from above. But the problem is, what about the night side of the planet? How do you track the storms? How do you know where the rain is, the snow, the weather, if you can't see the clouds? And that's why, just like a television can change from one channel to another, or a radio can change stations, satellites can change the frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum that they're looking at. We can go to infrared instead of visible light. You know, it's heat energy. You can see heat, and we've got another satellite picture from the same time, same satellite, out over the Pacific Ocean. That's the infrared side, and we're seeing temperature there. And even at night, when there's no light, everything still has a temperature.
So we're sensing something with a thermometer instead of perhaps the visible side of that, is what you're saying?
That's right. On this depiction, colder features are lighter shades, warmer features are dark. And so clouds tend to be colder than the ground. Clouds are higher in the atmosphere, it's cooler. And so that very same image on the western, or the left-hand side of the globe, now we can see the clouds there, even though it's nighttime, because we're seeing the temperatures. And one nice feature is that tropical storm there, just in the middle of the northern hemisphere there, hurricane or typhoon, depending on...
That's that swirly part that we see in the middle of the image?
There you go. You can even see the eye on it there, especially in the infrared image. So we've got two kinds of imagery there from the same satellite, different instruments, you know, different channels like on a television, visible and infrared. You know, it turns out there's no one magic tool. Each has its strengths, each has its flaws, weaknesses. The visible is nice, it's intuitive, it's easy to understand, but doesn't work at night. Infrared is nice, it works at night, you can see temperatures, but there is a catch. What if your clouds and the nearby bare ground or open water, what if those were about the same temperature?
Oh, that's going to be hard to figure out what's going on.
If you can only see temperature and you have two features that are the same temperature, they will look the same. You won't be able to tell. They're camouflaged. This happens, especially, it can happen around Alaska, especially over the ocean when you have low clouds that are the same temperature as the open water.
That happens quite a bit in Alaska.
We have an example. Now, this is from a different geostationary satellite. It's down over the Atlantic Ocean. Look in the South Atlantic. In infrared, We've highlighted in a yellow circle there. There's some patches of clouds, but it looks like there's a clear area in the middle of that image.
Sure. Yep.
That's the infrared look. But let's take a look at the visible channel, and we can see there's a stripe of clouds across the middle of that circle that is only visible in the visible.
Okay. Right.
The trick here is that those are low clouds of about the same temperature as the surrounding ocean. So from an infrared point of view, where you're seeing temperature, the clouds in the water nearby are the same temperature, they look the same. It's only on the visible that you can see what stands out as the actual imagery.
Okay.
Two tools, each have their strengths and weaknesses. Can we combine them? That's where the day-night band comes in.
Oh, okay.
It's a super sensitive visible sensor that can actually see by moonlight. It can even see the aurora.
Wow.
And in Alaska, we have long winter nights. We can use that day-night band. Here's an example from that storm that blew the Kullik drilling platform ashore near Kodiak Island in December back in 2012. This image is right near when that storm happened, and it's in the middle of the night in December.
This looks like visible imagery.
Looks like daytime imagery. It's amazing. That sensor can take any little bit of moonlight and just make the most of it. And we can see so much detail. Even in the northern part of the image there, you can see some aurora up there. The northern lights
That's that band that goes across the Arctic slope?
You got it. That's the northern lights. We're seeing black and white image here, so you don't get the green or the purple colors there. But that is the aurora. There's another example of the day-night band, and this is from January of 2013. It's about 4 in the morning, and this is a snapshot from Weather Service software. And we can even see in the middle of the image, there's the lights of Fairbanks and North Pole over to Eielson Air Force Base. Anchorage and Matsu lights, city lights, are evident as well. We can see, even though it's 4 in the morning in January, there is no sunlight to be had, that just enough moonlight is available that this sensor can see that. So we're trying to solve that puzzle where visible light is good, but only during the daytime. IR is good at night, but you can't see the difference between clouds and ground sometime. The day-night band is an attempt to do the best of both with one tool. And it's brand new for Alaska here, and we're hoping to use it in the forecast process and help predict storms, weather patterns, to help get good forecasts for people.
Okay, another tool in the weather toolkit for meteorologists in Alaska and researchers worldwide. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And you can learn more about GINA and the day-night band by going to the web address that you see on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. And I would guess that if you go to the website there, GINA's website, that you would be able to see with polar orbiting satellite information the walrus northeast of Point Lay tonight. A huge amount of walrus have hauled out there across the Chukchi seacoast over the last couple days, and you can see that image if you haven't yet on our Facebook page at facebook.com/NWS Alaska. Just an amazing set of pictures there from the NOAA fisheries folks there. Now, as you're looking at the sea ice edge, this is the main pack, but we're also getting cold enough air to freeze up some coastal ice there around Kaktovik to Prudhoe Bay. So no doubt that we have now turned the corner into the next ice season. And since it's October 1st, that means all the ice that survived the summer is now multi-year ice. So this ice just kind of got a little bit of a birthday there. Anytime you'd like to see this type of imagery, satellite pictures, or even outlooks for your community along the coast or any part of Alaska, weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php is a place to go. On to the marine forecast now. Driving northerly winds will be picking up across the North and South Lynn Canal at Frederick Sound and Stevens Passage, with 40-knot winds and 5-foot seas expected to come up by Thursday. Southeasterlies a little bit further south into the Clarence Strait, and look at the stronger winds coming up the coast. 45 knots coming offshore with 19-foot seas there. 18 to 16-foot seas from Sitka southward toward Craig. 40 to 45 knots are expected there on Thursday. That should diminish somewhat as we get into Friday, but stronger southerly winds still going up the coast toward Yakutat at 40 knots with a 20-foot sea, 21-foot seas out of the northern entrances, and the inner waterways looking at more of a south and southeasterly flow at 25 knots, with most of the region looking at 5-foot seas by Friday. So strong winds tomorrow and again on Friday for the marine areas in southeast. North and northeasterlies coming through the north and western parts of the Gulf. Northeasterly winds at 15 with 3-foot seas in Prince William Sound. 35 to 40 knot winds outside of Resurrection Bay and east of the Barren Islands. 40 knots on the east side of Kodiak. Shelikof Strait looking at 35 knots with a 10-foot sea. Northerlies in the northern northern Cook Inlet at 20 knots. Those diminish as we get into Friday, though, at 15 knots, with northwesterlies cutting across the Barrens at 25 knots and northerlies slowing just a little bit inside of Prince William Sound. Look for north winds still going at 30 knots, and the northern Gulf of Alaska at 14-foot seas are expected. Northeasterlies on either side of Alaska Peninsula as we go into Thursday, with 8-foot seas in the Bering, 18-foot seas there across the North Pacific, and much stronger winds on the Pacific side at 40 knots. As we get into Friday, winds are settling down to more of a northwesterly flow at 35 knots, 13-foot seas there around Castle Cape to Chignik. Northerly winds around Port Hayden at 25 knots with a 10-foot sea. Once you get into Bristol Bay, those seas diminish to about 5 feet. And across the Aleutians, north and easterly winds here, 20 to 25 knots, especially on the Bering side, 7 to 8-foot seas there. We have a north wind going out in the west. Watch this as the next frontal boundary sweeps in. We get into a westerly flow across Attu at 20 knots with a 14-foot sea. Northeasterly is still working across the Bering at 20 to 25 knots and 20 to 30 knots across the Pacific side. The winds diminish somewhat. The seas still holding up there at 12 to 16 feet with the highest levels there south of Unalaska and Nikolsky. For the west coast, northerlies, of course, coming out of the Bering, 20 to 30 knots down the coastline, 8-foot seas there out of the Kuskokwim, 4-foot seas outside of St. Lawrence, and northerlies through the Pribilofs, 25 knots with an 8-foot sea. Those become a little bit more easterly with time on Friday. 9-foot seas are expected there, 4-foot seas in the north, and 7-foot seas continue around the St. Matthew Island waters. For the North Slope, west and northwesterly winds coming in. That's going to help keep the ice freezing up a little bit more. 15 to 25 knots, still looking at open water with 3 to 5-foot seas there. 7-foot seas outside of Kotzebue Sound, becoming northerly on Friday at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, and northerlies outside of Point Hacklet. 4-foot seas expected there. North and easterly winds across the Beaufort Seacoast at 10 to 15 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, another frontal boundary is working across the North Slope. That's going to allow more snow showers to form with that north and westerly flow coming in. A much stronger storm out over the open waters of the Gulf. Storm warnings are in effect for the offshore areas. Winds will come up tomorrow across southeast with rain spreading in, and look for the winds to continue into Friday, though they will diminish somewhat. Another frontal boundary moving into the west on the western side of high pressure. Showers and drizzle and low clouds expected for parts of the Bering, and much colder weather moving in for the weekend. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.